Hey friends, tonight we begin in a French palace, the kind with corridors longer than most people's lifespans, walls lined with oil portraits that never quite stop watching, and the lingering scent of stale rosewater and roasted partridge. But forget the king for now. Tonight, the first person you meet doesn't wear a crown or even shoes that match. He wears bells, tiny, jingling, judgmental bells. His name is Triboulet, and unlike the noblemen still drooling into their feather pillows, he's already awake. He always is. The jester knows that if you want to change history, just slightly, just quietly, you have to wake up early enough to rewrite the margins before the scribes get to them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing the little sleepy map of our community unfold. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in France, sometime around the year 1514, just before sunrise. The palace is a quiet beast at this hour vast, slumbering, with its velvet curtains drawn and its nobility nestled into goose feather mattresses. But one creature stirs. Triboulet, court jester to the king, is already lacing up his worn slippers and slipping down the hallways like a ghost in patchwork silk. His outfit is a kaleidoscope of faded reds and greens, stitched together in defiance of both symmetry and good taste. Bells dangle from his sleeves, ankles, and cap, chiming softly as he moves. They're meant to announce foolishness, but to Triboulet, they're punctuation question marks when he raises an eyebrow, exclamation points when he kicks over a wine goblet in mock surprise. Right now, he's heading somewhere no noble ever dares before breakfast. The cellars. You follow him through winding stairwells lit only by the glow of a few guttering torches. The air grows cooler with each step, thick with the scent of cork, mildew, and secrets. The palace cellars are less about wine and more about whispers. Down here, where the bottles breathe and the rats don't bother running, the servants talk. Gossip travels faster than any royal messenger, and Triboulet is fluent in it. He crouches beside a stack of crates and listens not with both ears, but with his whole body. A cook's apprentice complains about the missing flour. A guard grumbles about an officer's new orders. A footman mutters something about a general disgraced, disobedient, doomed, and Triboulet smiles. Not kindly. Historians still argue whether Triboulet truly had a hand in military affairs or if he merely overheard enough to sound prophetic. Some believe he was merely tolerated for his wit. Others suspect he was quietly indispensable. The king's unofficial eyes and ears in places where official eyes were never welcomed. You climb back upstairs behind him, the scent of damp wood clinging to your cloak. In the great hall, the palace begins to wake. Boots shuffle across marble. A scullery maid hums an off-key lullaby. A rooster somewhere outside loses its voice mid-crow. Triboulet weaves through it all, unseen and unbothered. He doesn't walk straight. His path curves like a question. He loops behind tapestries, dips into shadow, lifts a pear from a silver tray, and returns it 2 seconds later, half-eaten and somehow shinier. Then he enters the king's audience chamber alone. It's a space built to impress. Tall, echoing, coated in gold leaf and insecurity. The throne sits on a raised dais, draped in purple. Every inch of the chamber says, "Respect this man." But for now, it's just you and Triboulet, and he's humming. Not a jester's jig, a dirge, but played too fast, like a funeral march being chased by a drunken tambourine. You recognize it, though you don't know how. It's the kind of tune that plants itself in your head and grows there, blooming into a headache or a prophecy. And then, footsteps, dozens. The court enters in waves, nobles, advisors, the perpetually smug. Their eyes slide past the jester as if he's part of the decor. But he's watching them all, cataloging expressions, noting who's limping, who's fuming, who's wearing mourning black with suspicious enthusiasm. Finally, King Louis XIII arrives. He walks like a man allergic to his own crown, tired, regal, and vaguely annoyed by the concept of existence before noon. His robes sweep the floor behind him, catching crumbs, dust, and at least one small dog. He settles onto the throne with a sigh that would have been banned under better acoustics. Triboulet bows deeply. The bells jingle like a polite warning. "Good morning, Your Majesty," the jester chirps. "Everyone's here, except the truth." There's a pause, a sharp one. A ripple of unease dances across the room. A duke coughs. Someone drops a glove. The king raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. Triboulet continues, stepping lightly across the floor. "Shall we begin today with a joke or a judgment?" I find they're often the same. The courtiers laugh, nervously. The king pinches the bridge of his nose. This isn't new, but it's not routine either. Triboulet pushes. Just enough. He's not just here to entertain. He's here to warn, to redirect, to unearth. And by the time the king waves for the session to begin, the jester has already sown a quiet thread of tension through the room. Questions bloom silently behind every powdered face. You leave with him, stepping into a sun-drenched corridor that suddenly feels colder. He glances at you, as if noticing you for the first time. "Watch closely," he says, not quite smiling. Even fools can cast long shadows. You trail behind him now, out of the grand chamber and into the winding underbelly of the palace. The sun is barely rising, casting long, syrupy shadows through stained glass windows that stretch across cold stone like spilled honey. Dust floats lazily through the air, caught in golden shafts of light, as if even the particles themselves are reluctant to begin the day. But Triboulet is already 3 steps ahead of you, his mismatched slippers gliding silently, bells at his elbows giving the occasional jingle soft, deliberate, like punctuation to a joke only he understands. He mutters as he walks. The real war isn't fought on battlefields. It's brewed in kitchens, and sometimes overcooked. You round a corner into the palace's lower levels, passing marble statues that look like they're mid-sneeze from the cold. Everything down here is cooler, damper, more real. Gone are the gilded ceilings and perfume-soaked tapestries of the upper halls. This is where the air smells like rising bread, singed hair, and secrets. Triboulet pushes open the heavy oak door to the main kitchen and walks in like he owns it. And in a way, he does. The kitchen is alive, not in a poetic sense, truly alive. There are at least 20 people in motion, grinding spices, gutting fish, hacking poultry, stoking fires, shouting across steaming pots. A cat leaps from the rafters to snatch a rat mid-run. A boy slips on an onion peel and swears in a dialect you've never heard. It's chaos with a routine. Somehow, things get done. Meals are made. Gossip is exchanged. Triboulet doesn't help, of course. Helping is for people who aren't above it. But he samples. Always. He pinches a bit of boiled egg from a tray bound for the archbishop, lifts a slice of blood sausage with a dagger he definitely wasn't supposed to carry, and nods his approval while chewing with his mouth open. "Too much nutmeg," he says to no one in particular. A cook nearby blanches, then pretends not to have heard. That's the thing about him: everyone sees him, but no one wants to admit it. He drifts like a rumor in human form. The kitchen staff pretend he's just a decoration, a bit of colorful fluff that occasionally demands a slice of pear. But they talk louder when he's around. They speak with less care, not more. Because who would take a jester seriously? You stand in the corner, biting into a hunk of warm bread he tossed to you without looking. It's crusty, dense, and oddly comforting, like a secret passed from hand to hand. Around you, the kitchen crew chat as they chop and stir. The conversation is casual but pointed. They talk about nobles packing for sudden departures, about who has been seen meeting with which foreign envoy, about how the Duke of Ferrara's nephew left the palace last night through the stables in full armor, no less. Triboulet listens with the skill of a monk transcribing scripture. His eyes are soft and unfocused, but every flicker of movement, every change in tone, registers. He files the information away somewhere in the vault of his skull, each rumor shelved carefully beside yesterday's whispers and tomorrow's predictions. Historians still argue whether this information web was something Triboulet deliberately cultivated, or if he simply wandered into it like a drunk into a confessional. Some say he built it with purpose, aligning kitchen maids, stable boys, and laundry girls like chess pieces. Others claim he just listened better than anyone else. What no one denies is that he had access, and access was power. He leaves the kitchen without fanfare, and you follow him into the daylight. The upper floors are stirring now. Courtiers glide like swans down corridors, fanning themselves even though it's barely warm. Two men argue over whose feathered cap is the more fashionable insult to Spain. A dog barks at a statue. The palace hums with the kind of activity that seems important, but mostly isn't. Triboulet doesn't care. Hez heading toward a smaller chambera, circular one with tall windows and a globe so outdated it still labels Newfoundland as "Here be bears." It's where the King's Council is meeting this morning, and Triboulet is, naturally, not invited. So, of course, he goes. You slip in behind him and wedge yourself near a tapestry of a lion eating a man who looks oddly like the Minister of Finance. The room is already full of tension. The war in Italy isn't going well, and everyone knows it. But no one wants to admit it. That's where Triboulet comes in. "Gentlemen," he says, arms outstretched, "may I offer a toast to our next great defeat?" A few chuckles escape. Most don't know whether to laugh or reach for their swords. The king raises an eyebrow, but doesn't say no. Triboulet strolls to the war table, cluttered with maps, tokens, and wine stains. He taps one miniature flag with a long painted fingernail. This little army here moves like a goose drunk on mulled cider. Perhaps it needs a better handler. Someone mutters, "Fools don't give orders." Triboulet turns, bows with mocking elegance, and replies, "And yet I'm still here." The king doesn't speak, but his silence gives permission. Triboulet circles the table like a hungry cat. He points out supply lines incorrect. Paths through the Alps narrower than reported. The men around the table listen, pretending not to. He drops names, mispronounces them on purpose, calls out strategies disguised as riddles. And then he bows again and leaves. Later that day, you find him in the gardens, not strolling sprawled, one leg dangling from a bench, a hand lazily plucking petals from a flower. His bells tinkle with each shift of his weight. He hums that same strange melody, half funeral dirge, half tavern song. He glances at you. They think him confusing, but that's because they still expect things to make sense. You don't reply. There's no need. He pulls a folded message from his sleeve. The wax seal is unfamiliar, too intricate for a noble, too simple for a diplomat. He holds it up to the light, then tosses it into a nearby fountain. Wrong day, he says, or wrong war. The splash is small, but somehow it feels significant. Back inside the palace, preparations begin for the evening's entertainment. The nobles want jest. They demand distraction. Triboulet delivers. He juggles pairs, recites a satirical poem about naval incompetence that earns a full laugh from the admiral's wife, and performs a pantomime of the king negotiating with a stubborn mule. It's absurd. It's biting. It's barely coded political critique, and the court loves it. Except for one monotol advisor in velvet, whose smile stiffens with each line. He's heard these jokes before. He knows they aren't really jokes. Triboulet sees him, smiles, and, with perfect timing, juggles 3 lemons in the air own of which is clearly, unmistakably, an apple. No one notices, except the man who's just been compared to rotten fruit. Later that night, long after the candles have dripped themselves into stubby wax puddles, you find Triboulet alone in the music room. Not performing, not rehearsing, just sitting. One slipper half off his foot, a pear cord discarded beside the harpsichord, and a length of dusty velvet curtain draped over his shoulders like a makeshift cape. He's surrounded by instruments. Nobody really plays any more lutes, flutes, viols, and a hurdy-gurdy with a broken crank. The kind of room that remembers sounds even after they've died out. He sees you, gestures vaguely to the bench across from him. You sit. The silence between you is surprisingly comfortable. Outside, the wind whispers through cracks in the shutters. Somewhere down the corridor, someone coughs in their sleep. The palace is dozing, but the fool is wide awake. You ever wonder, he says suddenly, his voice softer than usual, what happens if the fool is the only one who isn't pretending? He doesn't wait for an answer. Instead, he opens a small notebook. The cover is worn, the edges frayed, the corners smudged with grease. Its pages are filled with impossibly dense scribbles, shorthand, symbols, miniature diagrams, and odd drawings of sheep falling over. It's his record, his code book, his quiet rebellion. He flips to a page marked by a red wine stain, shaped suspiciously like the Pope's hat. On it is a sequence of sketches and rhymes that make no sense to you, but clearly mean something to him. He chuckles, circles a few lines with charcoal, and then closes the book like a priest sealing a confession. Tomorrow, the Queen's cousin from Brittany is visiting. A dour, pious woman who finds laughter suspicious and satire sacrilegious. She's been known to fast during feast days just to spite gluttonous nobles. Not someone who appreciates juggling or poems about spoiled stew. Triboulet knows he must tread carefully, cleverly, maybe even reverently, though not too much, or they'll suspect something's wrong. You watch as he stands and paces, back and forth, left foot, right foot, bell, bell, creak. The floor groans beneath his slippered steps like it's whispering warnings. The candle beside him sputters, threatening to die, but never quite does. Historians still argue whether Triboulet's notebook was truly a code of political satire or merely the ramblings of an eccentric man with too much time and too many enemies. Some say he used it to predict shifts in alliances, tracking gossip like a General Maps troop movements. Others insist it was just a diary with doodles and riddles. A few even claim the notebook never existed at all, that it was invented by later playwrights to romanticize the fool. Whatever the truth, the pages are real tonight. Plan A, he says, is a parable about two ducks who open a monastery. You raise an eyebrow. Plan B is considerably less graceful, but involves a live pig and a broken chandelier. He grins like a boy who just found the perfect stone to throw. You follow him the next morning through the echoing corridors of the palace. Preparations are already underway for the Queen's cousin's arrival. Servants rush with linen, fresh flowers, and overly sugared almonds. A boy is scrubbing bird droppings from a statue of St. Bernard. A priest is muttering nervously over a new Latin homily that will probably be ignored. The atmosphere is thick with worry and perfume. She arrives at noon, and she is exactly as feared. Tall, stiff-necked, her veil starched to a degree that suggests personal hostility. Her eyes sweep the room like a tax ledger. She smiles once at a crucifix. Everyone else she tolerates. Barely. Lunch is silent. A 10-course masterpiece of French gastronomy served in near total quiet, broken only by the occasional squeak of cutlery or nervous cough. Triboulet is not at the table. He is pacing just outside, counting beats on his fingers, mouthing words. Finally, the moment comes. He enters the dining hall, not with a bang, but a subtle stumble, just enough to startle, not offend. He wears no fool's cap today, only a single feather tucked behind one ear, and a belt of bells muted with velvet. His face is calm, his voice soft. "Your Grace," he says, bowing so low his forehead nearly kisses the marble. "I bring you three things: a song, a secret, and a story that might be true." Everyone freezes. She nods barely. He begins with the song, a gentle melody, almost mournful, about two chickens who fall in love across class lines. One royal, one from the gutter. It's absurd and clearly a metaphor. He sings with such earnestness that even the most humorless knight stifles a laugh. The Queen's cousin doesn't laugh, but she listens. Then comes the secret. Triboulet leans in close, whispering something into her ear. She blinks. There is a pause. Then, for the briefest of moments, she smiles, not a full grin, just the ghost of amusement passing through her lips like a bird deciding not to land. Finally, he tells his story, a tale about a jester in a distant land who once insulted the wrong man and was sentenced to death. But when asked how he wished to die, he replied, "Of old age." The king, amused, pardoned him. The lesson? Never give a fool an opening if you're not ready for the punchline. The room exhales. Even the Queen's cousin claps. Once. Later, in the hallway, you catch up with him. He's flushed, breathing fast. The feather behind his ear is bent. "That," he says, "was the most dangerous performance of my life." You ask what he whispered? He shrugs. Told her the roof of her chapel leaks, and that I'm the only man in France, rude enough to admit it. You both laugh. It's not a happy laugh, but it's real. That evening, as the palace dims and the wind sings through high windows, Triboulet sits once more at his harpsichord. He doesn't play. He just rests his fingers on the keys. Then slowly, he draws his notebook from his coat. He flips to a fresh page and writes, "Today I made a nun laugh. Pray for me." Then he sketches two ducks building a chapel. Underneath it, he writes, Plan A worked. The next morning begins the way most mornings in a 17th century French palace does somewhere between chaos and ritual. You wake to the sounds of distant coughing, boots stomping over stone, the clash of iron pots in the lower kitchens, and floating through it all, the unmistakable off-key warbling of Triboulet. Hez singing again. Something about a bishop who lost his breeches and had to officiate mass wrapped in a tapestry. You sit up slowly. The chill in the room has teeth. The hearth has long since gone cold, and your blanket has become the only line of defense between you and the stubborn draft creeping beneath the door. But Triboulet's voice keeps climbing, tripping over notes, deliberately wrong, full of glee. It echoes like a rooster who drank too much wine. You open the door, and there he is, fully dressed, half awake, holding a copper serving tray, balanced on one hand, and a goose feather quill in the other. On the tray, a stale croissant, 2 olives, and a single grape. Breakfast, he declares solemnly, fit for a diplomat you hope to insult. Without waiting for permission, he glides into the room, sets the tray down on a wobbly stool, and plops himself onto your bed like a cat made of bells and opinions. His cap jingles softly, and his eyes gleam. Big day, he says. You stare at him. It's too early for sarcasm. He grins wider. Don't worry, I've made it worse. Later that morning, a courier arrives at the palace with a leather pouch sealed in 2 layers of wax. The crest, Burgundy, which, for reasons involving marriage alliances and 4 years of cold soup, is not on friendly terms with the current king. Triboulet is summoned to the king's private chamber, not the audience hall, but the small, fire-warmed room where difficult matters are discussed over brandy and silk-gloved headaches. You trail behind him through the long, tapestry-lined corridor that leads to the royal wing. The guards part for him. He doesn't acknowledge them. His pace is steady, as if he's done this 1,000 times, and maybe he has. Inside, the king is pacing. Maps are spread over the floor like spilled laundry. The king's sleeves are rolled to the elbow, his hair slightly wild. You can smell the ink on his fingers before you even cross the threshold. Triboulet, the king says, without turning. Sire, the jester replies with a bow so low his nose nearly brushes the marble. We've been offered a truce. Triboulet blinks. How rude. The king chuckles. Barely. Then points to a specific part of the map somewhere near the Seine River. They want access through this valley, just for 3 weeks. A temporary corridor. They'll swear neutrality. Triboulet walks to the map, looks down, tilts his head like a bird. You do realize, he says after a moment, that valley floods in spring. Even goats avoid it when it rains. The king frowns. They say they'll bring their own bridges, the steward offers. Triboulet raises an eyebrow. And will they carry them on their backs? Like snails. How charming. There's silence. Then the fool says, quite plainly, they want to pass through because they have nowhere else to go, and because they assume you're too polite to say no. Historians still argue whether this specific exchange altered the course of French military decisions that season. What's clear, however, is that the king did not grant Burgundy permission. That valley was not opened. And days later, reports came of a small army bogged down in flooded terrain, unable to advance, surrounded by increasingly irritable frogs. Back in the courtyard, Triboulet stops to feed a pigeon with crumbs from the same croissant he offered you earlier. Funny thing about kings, he mutters. They're always 3 steps from brilliance and 2 from disaster. My job is to make sure they don't trip over their own robes. You nod. He tosses the last of the croissant to the bird, which snatches it with greedy delight. You ask him how he knew the valley was flooded. He shrugs. I listen to the cook. Her cousin sells firewood in those parts. He hasn't delivered in weeks. That afternoon, Triboulet disappears for hours. When you find him again, it's not in the gardens or the kitchens, but in the old cellar beneath the palace, the one that floods when it rains and echoes strangely when you walk through it. He's sitting on a barrel of pickled onions, talking to himself. Or rather, to the rats. They're better listeners than nobles, he explains as you approach, and less likely to stab you with a spoon. He's scribbling something on a piece of parchment. Short sentences, codes, doodles of boots stuck in mud. A miniature flag. A bottle with legs. It's another letter. You can tell by the way he folds it. The way he tucks it into a hollowed-out chess piece. The way he whispers to no one, let's see if they're still watching. The next day, that chess piece is delivered accidentally. One Sumesto, a merchant from Genoa, who carries it east without ever opening it. 3 days later, the Genoan port closes to Burgundian ships, citing mold concerns. Triboulet says nothing, but he smiles a little more than usual. That night, you sit beside him in the great hall after everyone else has gone to sleep. The fire burns low. The scent of roasted onions lingers in the air, stubborn and comforting. He hums a lullaby you don't recognize. Then says softly, "A good fool listens twice as much as he speaks. That's why I make noise to cover how much I hear." You glance down at his boots. They're caked with mud. He notices your gaze and shrugs. Some valleys are worth walking through yourself. You wake before dawn, this time strangely alert. The palace is quieter than usual. There's no whistling, no clatter of spilled candlesticks, no muffled laughter echoing down the halls. Just the steady hush of early light pressing against old windows. You stretch and sit up slowly, expecting to hear Triboulet's usual morning chaos. But nothing, not even bells, which is worrying. You throw on your coat and step out into the corridor. The hallway feels different tense. Somewhere distant, muffled voices trade clipped instructions, and you catch the scent of fresh soap and roasted chestnuts, meaning the kitchens are unusually busy. You walk toward the front of the palace, passing servants brushing dust off tapestries that didn't look dusty yesterday, straightening paintings that have hung crooked for months. Reception day. You realize it before you reach the gallery. Someone important is coming, or several someones. That's the only time this level of coordinated fuss occurs, when noble visitors from other regions arrive to discuss, flatter, demand, or insult depending on their mood and the season. And today, Triboulet has disappeared. You find him in the scullery, of all places, squatting atop a wooden stool while peeling a pomegranate with a knife far too small for the task. His usual bells are gone, replaced with a simple hat that might have been stolen from a footman. He looks up and grins. "Guess who's coming to tea?" he asks, popping a seed into his mouth. You raise an eyebrow. He stands, wipes his sticky fingers on the hem of a curtain, and gestures for you to follow. "Today," he says, "we're going to insult a man with more land than wit, and more enemies than mirrors." By the time you reach the grand hall, it's already filling with sound. Footsteps on marble, the high murmur of gossip, the sharp crack of a ceremonial cane against the floor to signal a new guest's arrival. Servants carry silver platters loaded with delicacies, many of which are purely decorative. Courtiers gather in their best plumage, angling for favorable positions near the throne. The king, draped in velvet, already looks bored. And then the Marquis Chalas arrives. He is precisely, as Triboulet described, tall, pale, suspiciously perfumed, and radiating the kind of cold pride only someone with 6 titles and 7 lawsuits can muster. He offers a stiff bow, eyes flicking over the room like a man searching for someone to fire. Triboulet appears behind him, wearing his most extravagant motley, emerald green with gold trim, and bells that jingle like whispered mischief. In his hand, he carries a bucket. It's not just any bucket. It's polished to a gleam, tied with a velvet ribbon, and decorated with a single daisy perched delicately on the handle. The room falls into a confused hush. He walks straight toward the marquis. Everyone watches. The king shifts slightly on his throne, suddenly very interested. Triboulet bows with exaggerated grace, bucket in hand. "My lord," he says loudly, "in honor of your visit, I bring a gift unlike any other." The marquis raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. Triboulet sets the bucket at the marquis' feet and removes the lid. Inside, a folded note, a single grape, and a tiny spoon. The marquis picks up the note, squints at it, and reads aloud. "I thought of bringing wine, but feared it would drown your joy." Silence. Thena laugh. Not from the marquis. From someone near the back. Then another. And soon the entire hall is chuckling, ripples of laughter bouncing off the marble columns. Even the king lets out a snort he tries to disguise with a cough. But the marquis, he smiles, just barely, and offers Triboulet a slight, ironic nod. Triboulet returns the gesture, picks up the empty bucket, and pirouettes his way to the side of the hall, leaving behind whispers, giggles, and a room that now feels considerably lighter. But you were watching closely, and you saw it. In the exact moment the room burst into laughter, a page slipped unnoticed out of a side door carrying a tray of pastries. Hidden among the sugar-dusted tarts was a scroll, tightly rolled, sealed with wax bearing no crest. The kind of message you don't want anyone to trace. That scroll was passed to a steward who carried it through the servants' hall, where it disappeared into a crate bound for lion. The distraction had worked. Again. Historians still argue whether that message warned of a planned ambush or redirected vital supplies to avoid a siege. All we know is this. 3 days later, a border skirmish was mysteriously canceled. A battalion meant to advance never did, and no explanation was ever officially given. Triboulet, of course, takes no credit. Instead, he spends the evening challenging noblemen to thumb wrestling contests and composing limericks about spoiled butter. Later that night, you find him on the roof of the East Tower, staring at the stars through the lens of a cracked goblet. He holds the bucket beside him like a companion, the daisy still bobbing gently in the wind. You sit beside him. He hands you the goblet. "Want to see Saturn?" he asks. You raise the glass, squint, and see nothing but a smudge of candlelight. You hand it back. "Close enough?" He shrugs. People believe what they're ready to laugh at. Then he leans back, gazes at the sky, and adds quietly, "In a room full of swords, the man with the empty bucket gets to walk away." And somehow, that makes perfect sense. Morning creeps in, slow and gray, like a secret trying not to be noticed. There's a weight in the palace air today, heavier than usual. You wake to silence, which is never a good sign. No clatter of trays, no off-key whistling from the guards, no sarcastic limericks echoing from Triboulet's corner of the world. just the slow groan of old wood and the faint, deliberate shuffle of servants who are clearly trying not to disturb something or someone. You dress quickly, stepping out into the corridor where the chandeliers have already been polished and the carpets combed smooth with wooden paddles. That only happens when something important is about to unfold. The last time they did this much tidying, 3 duchesses came to visit, one of whom had a peacock on a leash, and another who tried to seduce the cook for a jar of imported saffron. But this time, no one is laughing. You find Triboulet in the scullery. He's sitting on the floor, barefoot, feeding crusts of bread to a rooster wearing what looks like a paper crown. Around his neck is a string of garlic cloves, and across his lap rests a very bent spoon. Why the garlic? You ask. He looks up. It wards off bad guests, also vampires, also people who take diplomacy too seriously. You raise an eyebrow. He sighs and stands. Spain, he says, dusting crumbs off his knees. They've sent someone. Late. Uninvited. Unexplained. You follow him through the palace as it hums with anxious energy. Everywhere, servants rush past, carrying flowers, polishing door handles, setting out wine that no one's supposed to drink. One of the advisors is yelling at a tailor to lower a hem by exactly 2 finger widths, and another is frantically asking where the good napkins went. The answer, as always, is that Triboulet made a kite out of them. Triboulet hums to himself as he weaves through the chaos. A Spanish envoy, late and unannounced, that's not a visit, that's a test. By mid-morning, the palace receives the envoy with stiff ceremony. The king takes his seat on the velvet throne, advisors line up like suspicious statues, and nobles begin filtering in to watch the spectacle. Even the court musicians are playing more carefully, as if worried a wrong note might spark a war. The doors open. In walks the Spanish ambassador. Hes tall, draped in black velvet, with a face carved from dried ink and eyes that don't blink often enough. Behind him trail 2 aides carrying a box, likely filled with either bribes or threats, and a scroll tied with crimson ribbon. He bows with a flourish that manages to be both insulting and precise. The room watches in absolute stillness. Then Triboulet enters. Not through the main door, through the side. Wearing a tunic stitched together from scraps of old flags and carrying a boot, a single, scruffy boot, polished to a shine and cradled in his arms like a sacred object. He marches right up to the ambassador and bows. "Honored sir," he says, "I bring you a gift from France, a boot." A stunned pause. "For stepping lightly," he adds, "or stomping dramatically. Your choice." The ambassador stares at the boot. The boot stares back, as only a boot can. Then louder. Not from the envoy, from the king. A chuckle at first, then a full-on laugh that seems to loosen the bolts of the entire hall. One by one, others join in. A few smiles appear among the diplomats. Someone coughs to cover their grin. The ambassador exhales through his nose. Maybe it's a sigh. Maybe it's amusement. Either way, he accepts the gesture, takes the boot, and nods once. Just once. Triboulet beams. But you see it right then. As the room tilts toward levity, a page slips through a service door, carrying what looks like a silver tray stacked with apricot pastries, except no one eats apricots in spring, and there's no silver service scheduled today. You nudge Triboulet. He nods without looking. Something else just happened. Historians still argue over the nature of the secret exchange that took place during that meeting. Some say it was a coded message smuggled under layers of pastry, sent from the southern coast to warn of a Spanish fleet shifting position near Marseille. Others insist it was a forged treaty intended to trick a third party into backing off a trade route. Whatever it was, 4 days later, a naval maneuver by Spain was called off without explanation. A French supply ship changed course without alerting its own fleet, and a warehouse in Bordeaux, previously marked for inspection, was suddenly left alone. Triboulet, of course, says nothing. He spends the afternoon making puppets out of garlic bulbs and telling riddles about sheep with criminal records. Later, you find him on the roof again, Hez feeding crumbs to pigeons and drawing something in chalk a spiral that turns into a map, that turns into a face, that turns into a boot. He doesn't explain it. He just hums. Sometimes, he says, a boot is just a boot. Other times, it's the reason someone sails left instead of right. You ask if he planned it all. He shrugs. I plan nothing, he says. I just leave holes in the noise for truth to sneak through. That evening, the king remarks that the Spanish envoy seemed oddly receptive. No one mentions the boot. No one questions the missing apricots. And no one dares bring up the garlic-scented puppet show currently happening in the hallway. You return to your room that night with your head spinning. On your pillow, a folded note awaits. It simply reads, "Apricots don't lie, but fools do. Carefully. You sleep with one eye on the window, just in case someone brings another boot. You wake up before the bells this time. It's quiet, but not the good kind. Not the kind that comes with freshly swept hallways and the faint smell of lavender from linens dried in the sun. This quiet is heavier, like the hush before a storm, or the silence of a cat who's definitely planning something. You get dressed in the dark, slipping into the hallway just in time to see Triboulet dart past with one sock on, a garlic braid draped over his shoulder, and an apple clutched in his teeth. He doesn't stop, just waves the apple at you like a sword and mumbles, "Follow the crumbs. You do." He leads you through 3 servant corridors, under a tapestry of St. Crispin, across the laundry courtyard, and finally into the stables, where he's already set up what can only be described as a small, makeshift headquarters for espionage. There's a crate, a stool, and a table with an ink pot, 3 spoons, and a cucumber carved into the shape of a dagger. "Welcome," he says, biting the apple, "to the fool's ministry of misinformation." You blink. He grins. Triboulet has a theory, and like all of his theories, it begins with something small. This time, a bread roll. Specifically, the missing bread roll from the bishop's lunch tray yesterday. No one else would have noticed. But Triboulet, he notices everything. And when he checked the kitchens, there was no missing inventory, no extra snacking, no crumbs. The bread wasn't eaten, it was taken. Taken, he says, because someone wanted to know what the bishop was eating, or where he was sitting, or when he was alone. That's when he started testing. A spoon placed upside down on a serving cart, a folded napkin marked with lemon juice, a candle extinguished too early. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone was sneaking through the palace not to steal riches or treasure, but to listen, to watch, to gather little details and disappear into the walls like a spider with too many ears. And so, naturally, Triboulet decides to become bait. He starts by writing a fake letter, just a few lines scribbled on parchment, sealed with a waxy thumbprint from a melted chess piece. It reads, "Meet at the Dovecote before sunset. Bring the ledger. No mistakes this time." He leaves it, casually, on his windowsill. By mid-morning, it's gone. Next, he tucks a silver coin into the hollow of a dusty book in the library volume 17 of the agricultural failures of the Champagne region. No one touches that shelf. No one should touch that shelf. By dusk, the coin is missing too. You follow him into the palace's lesser-known corners, the ones even the rats hesitate to explore. He points out footprints in flour, scratches on floor tiles where a door was opened too hard, the faintest impression of a chair moved half an inch. "It's not just one person," he whispers. "It's at least two, maybe three. And one of them has no idea what they're doing." He sets traps, not dangerous ones, of course, just clever ones. A wine bottle with a drop of ink at the cork. A mirror dusted lightly with cinnamon. A song, half sung aloud near the kitchen boy who talks too much and listens too little. By the next morning, half the court is murmuring about secret plots and vanishing scrolls and haunted napkins, exactly as he wanted. Then comes the performance. Triboulet stages a private play-in absurd comedy titled "The Rooster Who Betrayed the Grain," performed in the laundry courtyard, starring himself, a broom, and a goose wearing a tiara. The audience: a few maids, a gardener, a bored soldier, and, more importantly, whoever is lurking just beyond the hedges, pretending not to eavesdrop. The play is nonsense, of course, but within the lines are very deliberate phrases. The map beneath the pie tin, the signature forged with vinegar ink, the fool who laughs while the bread burns. The next day, a message is found in the fountain, written on cheesecloth, ink barely legible. It reads, "Too many eyes. Delay the shipment." Which shipment? No one knows. But the steward panics. The cook orders a full inspection of the storerooms, and the quartermaster is summoned by the king to explain why 6 sacks of barley are now unaccounted for. Triboulet twirls his hat, satisfied. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the peak of his influence, that curious intersection of spycraft and theater, mischief and manipulation. Some claim it was pure luck. Others argue he had a network of informants. A few suspect he was bluffing all along, daring the real spies to flinch first. Whatever the truth, one thing becomes clear. The court is being watched, but not just by foreign eyes. Triboulet has eyes in strange places. You find him later in the candle cellar, talking to the scullery maid about pigeons. Messenger birds, he explains, are loyal, until they're not. That's why I whisper in their direction every Tuesday. He shows you a tiny scroll, hidden inside a hollowed-out cork. The message? The sky is full of breadcrumbs. You don't ask what it means. Instead, you help him set a final stage. A tea party in the middle of the servants' courtyard, complete with invisible guests. Each chair has a name card: Count Espion, Lady Distraction, Sir Hush Hush, and the Marzipan Scribe. On the table, an empty teapot, a stack of blank pages, and 4 cinnamon sticks arranged like a compass. No one is invited, but Triboulet makes sure everyone hears about it. That evening, one of the palace cats gray, one ear bent, delivers a dead mouse to the fake tea table. Tied to its tail is a ribbon. Blue. The same color the steward uses to mark the confidential ledgers. Triboulet lifts it, sniffs it, and smiles. "Ah," he says, At last, we're being taken seriously. You don't know whether to laugh or run. That night, as the palace settles into uneasy quiet, Triboulet sits on the parapet, staring out at the darkening horizon. The thing about secrets, he says softly, is they prefer to be alone. But laughter? Laughter wants a crowd. So I gave them both a party. You lie awake a little longer that night, wondering if the real joke isn't being told behind your back, but right in front of you, in full costume. And suddenly, the silence doesn't feel quite so quiet anymore. By the time the sun creeps over the eastern ramparts, the entire palace seems to be holding its breath. No trumpet sounds. No servant rushes through the hallways with urgent messages. Even the pigeons on the roof are oddly still. And yet, tension crackles in the air like the static before a thunderstorm, or a joke whose punchline hasn't landed yet. You wake with that feeling in your gut again. The one that tells you today is either going to be very important, very strange, or both. Triboulet is already awake, naturally. You find him in the small breakfast alcove with 3 muffins arranged like a triangle, a boiled egg propped upright in a goblet, and 2 sugar cubes stacked like a tower. It's a model of the grain network, he announces with a flourish, gesturing to the muffin closest to the salt shaker. This is the southern port, currently under accidental renovation after a barrel of eels exploded. Allegedly. You sit down slowly. The egg, he continues, is the steward's office, fragile, contained, and dangerously easy to crack. You nod, unsure how seriously to take any of this. He leans in, voice lowered. They're panicking. The spies, I mean. You can feel it. They've read too many fake reports, half of which I wrote using rhyming couplets. I think one of them actually tried to smuggle out a shopping list for invisible ink, fresh radishes, and 2 goats with soft feet. You ask what soft feet means. He ignores you. Instead, he pushes the sugar tower over with 1 finger. That's the bell tower. We're going up. You sigh. Of course you are. By mid-morning, you're both climbing the bell tower again. The stairs narrower than you remember, or maybe the anxiety is just pressing in harder. Halfway up, Triboulet stops to leave a wrapped plum on a step. When you ask why, he says only, test of impulse control. At the top, nothing seems out of place. A few old scrolls gathering dust. An empty wine bottle that might have been from a midnight rendezvous, or just a very tired monk. But as Triboulet begins tapping on stones and sniffing the mortar like he's judging a cheese competition, you notice something wedged between the beams above the bell. It's a note. No wax seal, no ribbon, no name. Just a triangle of folded parchment with faint writing across the top. Triboulet uses the edge of his hat to pull it down. Always assume ink traps, he mutters, and unfolds it delicately. 3 words. It begins tonight. You both stare at it. Then, just as Triboulet opens his mouth, there's a crash below somewhere between the kitchens and the laundry wing. Not loud, but heavy. A thud with purpose. He tucks the note into his sleeve and grins. Finally, he whispers, "They're done watching." What follows is chaos polite, well-dressed 17th century chaos, but chaos nonetheless. By noon, the steward's office is in lockdown. The inventory ledgers have been removed. 2 royal scribes are questioned behind velvet curtains, while a third is caught attempting to eat part of a parchment scroll. You and Triboulet, of course, are not officially involved in any of this. Unofficially, however, You find yourselves in the armory, disguised as candle inspectors, tapping the walls for excessive soot echoes while listening to guards mutter about missing documents and strange footprints near the wine cellar. Triboulet sketches every footprint he sees into a small notebook labeled Things I May Regret Later. Then around tea time, something shifts. The king announces an unscheduled council meeting. That never happens. Council meetings are meticulously timed, with appropriate food courses, embroidered chair cushions, and a mandatory harpist. When one is called unannounced, it means something serious, or someone's finally admitted they can't find their ceremonial hat. Triboulet insists you attend. But we're not on the council, you protest. He shrugs. Neither is the cat, but she shows up for fish. You arrive late enough that no one notices you, slipping behind a curtain near the fireplace, where the warmth makes the entire room smell faintly of roasted pears and worry. The council chamber buzzes with debate. Apparently, the note Triboulet found, or rather, planted, as you later learn, was found again, this time on the steward's desk. Except this version wasn't written by the spies. It was written by Triboulet himself, with slightly different wording. Begin the ruse tonight. Which sounds almost the same unless you're the one who knows it's not the original. Historians still argue. Triboulet whispers behind his hand. Whether I ever saw the real note or just made both of them up. You glance at him. He winks. In the hours that follow, the palace undergoes a transformation. Guards are doubled. Orders are shouted. Lock boxes are carried out under armed escort. And Triboulet bakes a cake. It's a lopsided almond thing with too much lemon, shaped vaguely like a goose, and covered in frosting swirls meant to resemble military formations. You ask why. Because, he says, tonight is the night the spies stop hiding. That evening, just as the sun dips low and the wine has begun flowing too freely, the spies move. Two figures spotted near the south wing. One caught with a key he wasn't supposed to have. A kitchen boy confesses to delivering scrolls to someone with a green feather and a voice like old grapes. Triboulet listens to the reports as if they're bedtime stories. Then, satisfied, he puts on a velvet cloak, paints a mustache on his chin with soot, and declares he's going for a late walk with destiny. You follow him into the gardens, where the moonlight turns everything into silver-blue dreams. He leads you to the fountain, the same one where you once left that folded note weeks ago. He sits on the edge, dips his fingers in the water, and finally exhales. I think, he says, we've played enough games. You ask if the kingdom is safe. He nods. For now. Then he pulls the ribbon from his sleeve, the one found on the mouse's tail. He ties it around the hilt of a butter knife and throws it into the fountain. What was that for? You ask. Symbolism. He replies. The stars ripple in the water, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls once. You don't sleep that night, not really. You lie in bed, eyes shut, mind wide awake. Every rustle in the corridor, every gust of wind through the shutters feels amplified. You listen, hoping it's nothing. But some part of you, the part that's grown sharper since this game of riddles and ribboned mice began, knows better. There's a storm gathering, not outside, but inside the palace, inside its walls, its secrets, and its shadows. Triboulet's message still sits folded on your table. It's not much, just a few words in looping script. The riddles unravel, but so do lies. It shouldn't chill you, but it does. Because it wasn't meant for you. It wasn't meant for the king. It was meant for whoever else is playing this game, someone who's decided to stop hiding and start taunting. Morning brings no answers, only more unease. You find Triboulet in the garden, tossing crumbs to birds while muttering under his breath. A pigeon tries to peck the feather from his hat. He smacks it gently with a rolled-up pastry and returns to feeding a particularly anxious squirrel he insists is named Duke Whiskerchin. "You look awful," he says when he spots you. "Didn't sleep." "Me neither," he replies cheerfully. "But look, Duke Whiskerchin found the almond I buried last week. That's a good omen." You're about to suggest that trusting prophetic rodents might be a sign of stress when he suddenly straightens up. "They've changed tone," he says. "The spies?" He nods, tossing the rest of the crumbs into the bushes. They're not just watching anymore. They're provoking. That message at the chapel that wasn't warning. That was performance. Theater. You glance around. Servants are moving slowly. Guards look distracted. The air in the palace feels charged. What do we do? Triboulet's grin returns, but this time it doesn't quite reach his eyes. We set the stage. By mid-morning, you're in the old scriptorium once used for copying royal decrees, now mostly housing mildew and memories. Triboulet insists it's the perfect place to bait a trap. He lays out a single scroll. On the outside, it's marked with the king's personal seal, though Triboulet assures you he carved the wax himself using a warmed spoon and a piece of bread. Inside, a fabricated list of informants within the palace, complete with absurd code names and flamboyant backstories. The Violet Ferret, Triboulet reads aloud, known for communicating via scented handkerchiefs. Madame Parsnip, an alleged clairvoyant with a fondness for eavesdropping in the bath. You stare. No one's going to believe this. That's the point, he replies. Some of it's ridiculous, but buried in the nonsense names, places, hints. Enough to make them wonder. Enough to make them act. You leave the scroll in a half-open drawer under a loose tile in the floor. A spot Triboulet assures you is spy gold. Then you wait. It disappears before sunset. Triboulet is giddy. He celebrates by composing a poem to commemorate the scroll's theft, which he insists on performing for the Court Jesters Guild, despite the fact that it currently consists only of himself, a stuffed owl, and a sock with eyes drawn on it. You let him have his moment. But as the hours pass, the unease grows. You'd expected silence. Instead, messages begin appearing again. First, in the kitchens. A sliver of parchment wedged beneath the pepper grinder. The ferret smells like violets. Then, outside the royal library, where a page is found tucked into a book of lullabies, Parsnip sees. Parsnip hears. And finally, by the guard barracks, painted in faint soot on the door frame. We are inside the joke. Triboulet stops laughing after that one. That evening, you find him on the roof. He's staring out across the dark courtyard, where torchlight flickers like fireflies. Below, guards patrol in uneven pairs. A dog barks once, then quiets. Somewhere, a lute plays a lullaby no one remembers. "You know," he says, "I never really thought it would get this far. You wait. I thought they'd panic. Run. But they're enjoying it. The riddles. The chase. Whoever's behind this," he sighs. "They're like me." You glance at him, but not on our side. He nods. "They're mocking us. Using our own language rhymes, misdirection, theater. But not for fun anymore. This is calculated now. There's strategy behind it." A long pause. "They left another doll," he adds quietly. You blink. Another. stuffed with petals this time. Lavender. It was on my pillow. Triboulet doubles security on his own rooms, refuses to sleep without a guard by the door. For the first time since this began, he seems nervous. Not afraid, exactly, but focused, sharpened. He no longer cracks jokes in meetings, no longer performs impromptu dances in the corridor. His laughter, once effortless, now seems delayed, like he's waiting for someone else to laugh first. And then the scroll comes, found not in some hidden drawer or behind a tapestry, but nailed, yes, nailed to the king's bedchamber door, in red wax, with a dagger. The fool dies last. Triboulet reads it without speaking, then folds it once, twice, 3 times, and places it into the fire. You say nothing. Because what do you say when the game you started for amusement suddenly turns deadly? The palace reacts fast. Doors are barred. Anyone without a seal is questioned. Even the royal cat is temporarily detained, though she escapes and exacts vengeance by shredding the steward's slippers. But the riddles continue. Shorter now, sharper. Left in stranger places, the mouth of a roast pig at supper, inside a loaf of bread, hidden in the petals of a bouquet meant for the visiting duke. Laugh too loud, and silence hears. Even jesters bleed. You find one inside your own sleeve one morning, despite being sure it hadn't been there the night before. Which mask are you? You drop it like it burned you. Triboulet reads it with grim amusement. They're starting to enjoy themselves too much, he mutters. Then he looks at you. We need to end this. You nod. But how do you end a joke when you're not the one telling it anymore? The chapel still smells of scorched incense and damp stone, like a cathedral-sized secret exhaled just before being sealed shut again. You step carefully across the ash-streaked floor, watching Triboulet kneel beside the charred altar. His fingers hover over the newly carved word in the stone, just one word, burned into permanence. Soon, not a threat, not a joke, a promise, or maybe a countdown. Triboulet stares at it with a strange expression. Not fear, not exactly anger either, more like disappointment. So predictable, he mutters, brushing soot from his sleeve. Burn the message, leave a cryptic word, give everyone goosebumps. Yes, well done, mysterious antagonist. 10 points for drama. You look around. The chapel is quiet. Too quiet. Even the echoes seem to be hiding. You can almost feel the air folding in on itself. They've escalated, you say, softly. Triboulet nods. They've also made a mistake. You blink. You think leaving this was a mistake? Oh no, he says, standing. The mistake was giving me time to prepare a response. He brushes off his knees, his usual grin slowly returning to his face. We're not playing defense anymore. Back in his chamber, Triboulet drags out an enormous wooden trunk from beneath his bed. It creaks like it's holding a century of regret. This, he says with a dramatic flourish, is the archive of failed plays, dangerous jokes, and ideas I wasn't brave enough to perform. He flips it open. Scrolls, masks, scraps of parchment with punchlines written upside down. There's a small puppet wearing a crown, and a crumpled script titled, "The Queen's Nose No She Quickly Hides That One." But near the bottom, he pulls out a rolled scroll tied with red twine. This one, he says, was written for a moment just like this. You raise an eyebrow. You planned for this exact situation? I planned for every ridiculous possibility, including being stalked by a rival using burnt dolls and poetic threats. He unties the scroll, revealing a script titled, "The Funeral of Truth." You skim the opening lines. It's bizarre, melancholic, eerily personal. Are you sure about this? You ask. Triboulet nods, solemn. If they want the final act, let's make it unforgettable. That evening, notices appear throughout the palace. They're elegantly printed on thick parchment, sealed with wax that smells faintly of clove and smoke. The title reads, "You are cordially invited to the burial of the truth. Tonight, midnight, South Garden. No masks. There's no explanation, no fanfare. Just the Jester symbol at the bottom. A small bell inside a circle, hand-drawn. The reaction is swift. Some courtiers laugh it off as a performance. Others panic. A few wonder if it's a coded message from a foreign spy network. The steward faints briefly and has to be revived with mint tea. Even the queen raises an eyebrow, an event noted in the court journal as emotion adjacent. By midnight, the South Garden is lit with torchlight. Shadows ripple across the hedges. The air is heavy with anticipation. Triboulet stands beside a freshly dug grave, wearing not his usual motley, but a long black cloak. His jester's cap has been replaced by a simple circlet of ivy. In his hands, a small wooden box. The audience gathers in a semicircle, nobles, servants, guards. Even the royal cook, still holding a ladle, stands at the edge. They all stare at the box. Triboulet speaks. We gather tonight to bury what we've all trampled without care. Not a man, not a god, but something far rarer. He lifts the lid of the box. Inside, a blank scroll. The truth, he says, so often twisted, so often disguised, finally rests. He kneels, lowers the box into the earth, covers it with soil, slowly, deliberately, then steps back. And now, he whispers, we wait. The crowd begins to murmur. Someone coughs. A breeze ripples through the torches. Then a voice cuts through the quiet. You mistake burial for silence. The voice comes from the back low, smooth, like velvet dragged through gravel. A figure emerges from the hedge, cloaked, hooded, masked in shadows. You freeze. Triboulet turns slowly, his face unreadable. I was wondering when you'd arrive, he says. The figure steps forward. You're good with words, it replies. But I speak in silence. Triboulet chuckles. Then I suppose we're opposites. The figure stops just shy of the grave. We both perform, it says, but I don't seek applause. It tosses something into the dirt. A sealed scroll. Red wax, again. That same unmistakable signature, a bell with no clapper. You left riddles, Triboulet says. I answered them. You burned answers, the figure replies, and laughed through danger. And you, Triboulet says, eyes narrowing, hid behind metaphors and string. A pause. The figure lifts a hand. I offered warning. Triboulet lifts his chin. You offered fear. They stand, motionless, framed by firelight and confusion. The audience barely breathes. Then the figure says, simply, this ends tonight. It turns and vanishes into the dark. The palace erupts with speculation. The guards are ordered to search the entire grounds, though Triboulet assures them they'll find nothing. He returns to his chamber without another word. You follow. Inside, he pours himself a glass of wine, downs it in one gulp, then picks up the scroll the figure had tossed. He doesn't open it. Instead, he tosses it into the fireplace. Why? You ask. Because it's not a message, he says. It's bait. The flames crackle. Triboulet slumps into a chair. I think, he says, staring into the fire, this has never been about the king, or the court, or politics. You wait. It's been about me, about making me question myself. He pulls something from his pocket, a tiny bell. The same one he gave you. He holds it up. They're trying to take my voice, my humor, my madness. He closes his fist around it. They're trying to make me predictable. You nod slowly. So what now? Triboulet stands. Now, he says, I do the one thing they can't anticipate. He grins. I improvise. The first thing you notice the next morning is silence. Not a peaceful kind of silence, but the sort that clings like fog to the draperies and creeps under your skin. No lute playing in the corridor. No echoing shouts of kitchen servants. Not even the predictable cackle of Triboulet bouncing through the hallways like a human firecracker. Just stillness. You know something's off. When you reach the great hall, you find Triboulet already seated silent, composed, entirely devoid of flair. He sips tea, eyes fixed on the window. No jests, no props, no theatrics. Just a plain black doublet, and that same distant expression he wore after the scribe was found slumped over a scroll marked curtain. He doesn't look up as you approach. Is this a new act? You whisper. The brooding fool? He shakes his head. It's not an act. You sit beside him, cautiously. He doesn't meet your gaze, just stirs his tea, again and again. The problem with riddles, he says eventually, is they can be answered by anyone, even those who misunderstand the question. He sets down the spoon. I thought I was clever. I thought I was directing the tension. But now the play has actors I never cast. You're about to respond when the steward enters the room, flustered and pale. He approaches cautiously and places a folded cloth square on the table between you. You recognize it instantly. Black silk, blood-red embroidery. Another message. The fool has spoken. The crown must echo. Triboulet stares at the cloth, unmoving. After a long moment, he sighs. They've stopped trying to hide. Now they want a response. You ask, what kind? He replies, any kind. Rage, panic, denial. They don't care what I do. They just want the next scene. That night, Triboulet doesn't sleep. You hear the pacing, the creak of floorboards, the occasional muttered phrase followed by the hiss of parchment being crumpled. When you check on him just before dawn, he's surrounded by dozens of discarded drafts. On one parchment, a sketch stage with 3 thrones. On another, a play titled The Mask and the Mirror. Another simply reads, Exit, Pursued by Fear. He finally looks up at you, eyes bloodshot but blazing with clarity. We make them the protagonist. You blink. What? He nods. More to himself than to you. They want to control the story? Let's write one where their control becomes their prison. We bait them into the spotlight, where they have no shadows to hide in. You ask how, and he simply says, we give them a riddle too clever to ignore. The next evening, Triboulet delivers his final public proclamation. A scroll pinned to the center of the throne room's door. No riddles. No jokes. Just 5 lines. The fool stands still. The crown begins to sing. 3 truths buried. 1 bell to ring. Look to the mirror that shows no face. Follow the echo that leaves no trace. Find me where silence holds its breath. No signature, no seal. But the handwriting is unmistakable. The entire court erupts in confusion. The queen asks if the fool has taken up mysticism. The steward suggests arresting all the castle mirrors just to be safe, but you know this is bait. And it works. By midnight, a response arrives. A scroll pinned to the chapel door. This time, not embroidered, not sealed. Just ink-thick and trembling. The mirror has cracked. The breath has spoken. Your final trick awaits. Come alone. Triboulet reads it once, then again. Then he nods and begins to prepare. He dresses simply, no colors, no bells, no motley hat, just black. But not the same morning black from the burial of truth. This black is theatrical, intentional, stage-worthy. He tucks a scroll into his belt, grabs a single candle, and beckons you toward the eastern wing long abandoned, rarely used except for storage. "I'll go alone," he says, as requested. You hesitate. "And me?" He smirks. "You'll be the audience." You follow at a distance, through corridors that haven't seen footsteps in years. Cobwebs drape across doorways. The air grows colder, heavier. The echo of each step stretches just a little too long. At last, he stops before a rusted door. "This," he says quietly, "is the old council chamber. No one's used it since the fire." You nod. He pushes the door open. Inside, the room flickers with a single lantern lit already, casting long, swaying shadows. No one visible. Just a chair in the center. And beside it, a doll. Not burned, not bound. Just sitting. Its head turns slowly in the breeze. Triboulet steps inside. The door creaks shut behind him. You wait, heart racing. Then you hear it. Laughter. His laughter. Low at first, then rising, uncontrolled. Then silence. You push the door open again, breath caught in your throat. Hes still standing. But now the doll is gone. In its place, a scroll. Triboulet unrolls it, reads it silently, then hands it to you. Bravo. But the curtain never falls. We write the next act together. So, you look at him. He smiles finally. Now we know their name. Or at least a letter. He turns to leave. And you wonder, not for the first time, whether any of this was ever truly under control. Morning slips into the palace not with fanfare, but with a hush, the kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. You wake to the sound of quill on parchment, a steady rhythm just outside your chamber. Not frantic scribbling, not poetic muttering, just measured, thoughtful writing. You follow the sound and, unsurprisingly, find Triboulet seated cross-legged on the floor, just outside the west hallway, surrounded by open scrolls and half-burnt candles. He doesn't look up as you approach. He's too busy dipping his quill into a strange violet ink and scratching out another line of verse. You read over his shoulder. If you speak through laughter, you must also grieve through silence. You raise an eyebrow. That's unsettlingly calm of you. Triboulet gives a non-committal shrug. Grief is the final mask, he murmurs. I'm just stitching mine properly. You sit beside him. So, what is this exactly? He leans back, letting the ink dry on one scroll. Letters to people I haven't met, to versions of myself I don't remember being, to the silence that's been trying to answer me this whole time. He hands you one. The parchment is folded 3 times, sealed with wax, stamped with a simple symbol, his Jester's bell, crossed through. Inside is a single line. I forgive you. You look up. Forgive who? He shrugs again. Everyone. No one. Maybe just myself. Later that morning, the Queen summons him. It's not a command. It's not even a formal request. Just a note tucked into the folds of a clean robe sent to his room. It simply reads, "We need to speak." Triboulet doesn't bother changing. He goes barefoot, still ink-stained, scrolls tucked under one arm like they're part of his body. You trail behind him as he walks through the long gallery, sunlight spilling through stained glass. Guards glance up, half expecting him to throw a pie or release birds from his sleeves. But he does neither. He's quiet. The Queen waits alone in the eastern solarium, surrounded by plants that always seem far too alive for this kingdom. "You look thinner," she says, not unkindly. Triboulet bows, just slightly. "Thought weighs more than wine." She gestures for him to sit, but he declines. "So it's true," she says, folding her hands. "You're done." "I'm transforming," he corrects. "Not done." Her lips twitch. Not quite a smile. Not quite approval. "I read your letter," she says. "It was frighteningly beautiful." Truth is always a little frightening. They sit in silence for a beat too long. Then she asks, "Do you know who S is?" Triboulet's face shifts. Not surprise. Not denial. Just a long, quiet exhale. "No," he says. "But I think S knows me better than I want to admit." The Queen frowns. "I can protect you from enemies," she says, "but not from ghosts." "I know." "Then why provoke them?" He finally sits, gently placing the scrolls on the table between them. "Because silence is no longer safe," he says, "and I'm no longer afraid of applause." That night, something changes. Not visibly, not obviously, but you feel it. Triboulet doesn't joke. He doesn't riddle. He simply works. He rewrites lines, reviews old masks, dusts off props from years ago that no longer fit his face. He visits the old puppet master in the cellar and asks for a stage to be built small, temporary, collapsible, something intimate. You ask him what he's doing. He replies, "I'm writing a confession no one will believe." By dawn, parchment litters the chamber. You catch phrases here and there. "I was born laughing, but I don't remember joy." "My shadow has memorized more secrets than I have." "If the fool tells the truth, is he still a fool?" Each scroll is numbered, each one sealed. He arranges them in a small wooden chest. Then, without a word, he walks it down to the library and places it in the hands of the blind archivist. "This is for the end of the world," he says. The archivist nods solemnly and stores it behind the locked door marked "Unopened Futures." Then, one final scroll appears. Not embroidered, not sealed, just sitting on his pillow like it grew there overnight. You're the one who finds it. 3 lines only. "The time for riddles is past. You know where to find me. Bring no mask." Triboulet reads it once, then closes his eyes. He doesn't move for a long while. When he finally speaks, his voice is barely a whisper. "It's almost funny," he says. "We've circled each other so long, I don't even know who I'm performing for anymore." You say nothing. He stands, dusts himself off, and says simply, "Come with me." You follow him down to the cellar past the forgotten wine racks, past the broken loot collection, through the old kitchens now used only by ghosts. There, behind a rusted door, marked with a single faded Symbiola, cracked mirror, he stops. "This was the old confession chamber," he says. "No one's used it in decades." He pushes the door open. The room is empty, except for a chair and a mirror. And in the mirror himself, but not quite. His reflection stands straighter, smiles sharper. Wears his old colors, his old mask. The bell on its cap gleams. Triboulet steps inside. The door shuts behind him. You wait, and wait. Then you hear it. Laughter. Not lighthearted, not cruel, just full, whole, like 2 parts finally recognizing each other. Then silence. When you open the door again, the mirror is cracked. The chair is empty. Triboulet stands, eyes closed, breathing deep. "I'm ready," he says. "For what?" you ask. He turns to you. "For the final act." The morning after the performance that wasn't, the palace awakens with the sound of confusion. No trumpets, no drums, just whispers echoing down corridors, bouncing between tapestries. The servants are too quiet, the nobles too cheerful. It's the kind of mood where everyone pretends they slept through something they most certainly didn't. You head to the usual places, Tribolet's chamber, the kitchens, the cellar butt is nowhere. Even the old stool by the rose garden, where he sometimes napped with a deadpan monologue on bee politics, sits empty. The sun climbs. Still nothing. Around midday, you find a strange little envelope wedged under your door. It's not sealed. No wax. No symbol. Just folded parchment that smells faintly of rosewater and burnt sugar. You open it. Follow the ivy. Bring no expectations. Tell no one. There's no signature. But somehow, you already know. The ivy-covered hallway hasn't been used in years. It twists behind the west wing, ducking under crumbling stone arches, climbing walls like green fingers. It leads to a staircase, a narrow one, the kind built not for function, but secrecy. You climb it slowly. The stone steps creak in protest. You pass faded murals of saints, jesters, and one oddly smug-looking pig in a crown. At the top, a door. It opens before you knock. Tribolet stands there, in a robe you've never seen, charcoal gray, with thin silver threading. It catches the light like rain sliding down slate. "I thought you might be earlier," he says, "or not at all." You step inside. The room is round, lit by filtered sunlight, spilling through colored glass. A circle of chairs surrounds a single low table stacked with scrolls. Every inch of wall is covered in masks, some theatrical, some ceremonial, some grotesquely beautiful. "This," he says, gesturing to the room, "is the memory I don't perform." You take a seat. The room is warm, smells of parchment and lavender oil. Familiar, but strange. He sits across from you. "I used to think truth was something you revealed," he says, "like a secret hidden under laughter. And now?" He smiles faintly. "Now I think it's what you bury under all the roles you play." He takes down one of the masks. A simple one, just linen stretched over a wire frame, with wide cartoon eyes and an exaggerated frown. "This," he says, "was the face I wore the day the king's nephew was exiled." You frown. "I thought he left on his own." "So did he," Tribolet says, brushing dust from the mask. "But I was the one who whispered in the right ears, told the right joke at the wrong time, set the mood." He sets it down gently. "I didn't lie," he continues. "I simply gave people a more amusing version of events." You ask why. He shrugs. "Because people remember comedy. They ignore the footnotes." He walks slowly around the room, touching each mask as he passes. They say memory is unreliable. But masks, they remember everything. He stops at one tall, sharp, painted crimson. "This one I wore for the treaty with the Northern Duchy. Smiled so wide, my jaw ached. Meanwhile, half the council was planning to sabotage the talks. I cracked a joke about frozen wine and poisoned tongues. They laughed. 2 days later, the treaty collapsed. You blink. You sabotaged peace?" "No," he says. "I sabotaged theater. The piece was already broken. I just handed them the punchline." He returns to the chair, slower now, older. "I've spent a lifetime playing roles for people who never knew they were in a play." He leans forward. "But now, the final scene is mine to write." He opens a scroll and begins to read aloud. It's not poetry, not satire. It's a list. Names, places, moments, every whisper, every joke, every truth he ever twisted into something palatable. "They say history is written by the victors," he murmurs. "But the jesters? We write the footnotes." He pauses, then tears the scroll in half, burns it in a small bowl on the table. "The truth isn't in that list. he says. It's in the silence I kept. You spend the rest of the day in that room. He shows you masks made from old letters. A puppet he carved in the image of the queen when she was 15. A coin he never spent, minted in a year that doesn't appear on any record. Each one holds a story. Each one ends with a question. And the more you hear, the more you realize. The real performance was never in the throne room, or the banquets, or the festivals. It was here, in this circle of masks, where he kept the pieces of himself that no one ever asked about. Am not the sum of my jokes, he says finally. Am the pause that follows. As night falls, he leads you out through a hidden passage beneath the floorboards. You emerge in the west garden, dew already settling on the grass. He breathes in deep. You know what I envy about statues? He asks. You shake your head. They never have to explain themselves. He looks up at the moon, then at you. I think ill let this night go unrecorded, he says. No scroll, no ink, just memory. He offers his hand. You take it. And for the first time since you've known him, he doesn't smile. He just looks real, raw, and unmasked. The next morning, the palace has the strange hush of a place waiting for a punchline that never lands. Even the birds seem to chirp more cautiously, as if afraid to break the spell of silence hovering over the courtyards. Word travels slowly, but inevitably. Triboulet is gone again. Not vanished in the dramatic sense-no, overturned tables, or broken windows, but simply not where he should be. You know better than to panic. His disappearances are like commas in a long sentence, brief pauses that always serve a purpose. But this one feels heavier, like the sentence might be coming to a full stop. You begin your search without speaking to anyone. Asking would only invite speculation. And speculation in this place is a form of theater badly performed, and even worse remembered. You head toward the lesser-known wings, the crumbling balconies and unused chambers of the old palace, places only fools and ghosts bother to tread. It takes you until midday to find the ivy trail again, the same one from days earlier. But this time, something is different. It's thicker, wilder. The vines curl like script written in haste. You follow them instinctively, weaving through corridors that bend in ways they shouldn't. Eventually, they lead to the same narrow stairwell. But now, there's a candle burning on every step. No wind, no draft. Just flickering flames guiding you upward, like punctuation marks in a story you don't quite understand. At the top, the same strange door greets you. This time, it's unlocked. You step inside, and it's like walking into the memory of a stage. The room is dim, more shadows than light. The round chamber is lit by dozens, maybe hundreds of candles arranged in a spiral pattern on the stone floor. They pulse softly, as if breathing. In the center of the spiral sits Triboulet, not standing, not performing, just sitting, meditating perhaps, or pretending to. He doesn't acknowledge you right away. Instead, he slowly turns a small wooden box in his hands. Polished mahogany, brass corners. One of the only things in the room that looks expensive. You wait. Eventually, he speaks. Do you know what this is? He asks, still not looking up. You step closer. Shake your head. It's a music box, he says, but the song inside was lost. Lost? He nods. The craftsman died before he could wind it. He opens the box. There's no mechanism inside, just a small piece of parchment. He holds it up. On it, one single word. Applause. He chuckles bitterly. Even the empty things crave attention. He gestures for you to sit, and you dote the edge of the spiral. The candles throw his face into warm angles, deepening the hollows of his cheeks, exaggerating every crease, like he's slowly becoming a caricature of himself. I've spent the last 3 days remembering every lie I ever told, he says suddenly. You blink. That's a lot. Indeed, he says with a wry smile. Turns out I've lied more with silences than words. He begins to recite names. Not aloud, but on scraps of paper, each one scribbled and folded, then tossed into a small brass bowl beside him. The bowl is nearly full. What are you going to do with them? You ask. Burn them, he replies. Then drink the ashes with honey. That's revolting. He shrugs. Sometimes honesty needs to taste bitter first. You glance around. The masks are still on the wall, watching. But now, some of them are broken cracks splitting across their painted faces, as though the truth spoken here have begun to physically reshape the space. I want to tell you a story, Triboulet says. You nod. He leans forward. There once was a man who wore a mask so long he forgot what his face looked like. He became a master of emotion joy, sorrow, rage, love all performed to perfection. The audience adored him. They begged for more. He pauses. But one night, when the curtain fell, he looked in the mirror and saw nothing. You wait. What happened to him? Triboulet smiles. He wrote himself a new role, one without a script, one that let him disappear between the lines. You're not sure if that story was about him, or about you, or maybe both. He begins to pace the room now, speaking to the masks as if they were old friends, or old enemies. This one was for diplomacy, he says, pointing to a mask with soft colors and a gentle smile. I wore it when I convinced two warring dukes that their grandfathers had once been lovers. He gestures to another sharp angles and a toothy grin. This one I wore the day I sabotaged a corrupt bishop's coronation by announcing his secret fear of ducks. I released a dozen into the chapel. They quacked him into exile. You laugh. He doesn't. Humor is only a scalpel, he says quietly. It's what you cut that matters. Then he grows quiet, and finally says the thing you didn't expect. I think him ready to leave. You straighten. What do you mean, leave? He gestures broadly. The court, the stage, the endless performance. You're not sure what to say. Won't they come after you? You ask. Let them, he says. It'll be the ghost in their footnotes. Where will you go? He smiles. Somewhere with no mirrors. He begins packing his things, only a few. The music box. 3 unbroken masks. 1 tattered scroll. A ring you'd never noticed before, shaped like a serpent swallowing its tail. You help him. The silence is companionable. Then just as he's about to leave, he stops, turns, and hands you a single object, a mask, not one of his usual ones. This one is unfinished, half-painted, no expression. What's this? You ask. A blank page, he says, in case you ever want to write your own part. You hold it gently, as if it might shatter from meaning alone. And then he's gone. Not with a bang, not with a bell. Just a soft exhale of candlelight as the door swings shut behind him. The first few days after Triboulet's departure are thick with a strange kind of hush. Not silence exactly. There's still music at dinner, still gossip in the halls, but it all feels muffled, like the court itself has been placed under a blanket. No one mentions his name outright. That would be too honest, too revealing. Instead, people speak around him. The air feels lighter, don't you think? A noble woman whispers, though she looks over her shoulder before sipping her wine. I miss the structure of things. says one of the Queen's secretaries, folding his napkin for the fourth time in a row. You notice it everywhere. A joke that doesn't land. A toast that fizzles out. A tense pause at a council meeting that should have been filled with one of his ridiculous metaphors about frogs and treaties. But no one says it. Because saying it would mean admitting he mattered. And Jester's fool Zarent meant to matter. You keep walking the halls as if he might still be hiding in the shadows, behind curtains, under the spiral stair. Maybe he's tucked inside the Queen's powder cabinet, scribbling commentary onto her handkerchiefs. But every hiding spot is empty. Every clever echo is missing. And so, you turn your attention to his legacy, or what's left of it. The garden is where it happens. The old rose garden, with its cracked fountains and unruly paths, has long been a haven for misfits, lovers, and kids too clever for their own good. You're walking there one afternoon when you hear it. A voice, high-pitched, bold, and unmistakably mid-rhyme. You round the hedge and find the source. A child 8, maybe 9, dressed in a makeshift costume of kitchen rags and stolen lace. He stands atop an overturned bucket and performs a ridiculous monologue involving a goat, a bishop, and a misunderstanding involving undercooked potatoes. The small crowd of kitchen staff and junior scribes is in stitches. The boy bows dramatically, then slips and falls headfirst into the rosemary bush. Everyone gasps. Then they laugh harder, because somehow the tumble is perfect. You help the boy up, brushing leaves from his tunic. He grins at you, a smear of dirt on his cheek. Did I hold the final stanza too long? You blink. It was inspired. He sticks out his hand. Emile. You shake it. He's small, wiry, with eyes too old for his face. And there's something else. A glimmer. A rhythm. A pause that lands just right. You know that rhythm. You've seen it before. You sit with him on the low stone bench beneath the rose trellis. He chatters nonstop about words he's invented, about noble names he's turned into anagrams, about how he once made the chief steward snort wine by pretending to faint during soup. Did you know Triboulet? You ask gently. He nods. He left. He nods again. I found something, he says, pulling a worn leather-bound notebook from his satchel. It was under the ivy near the fountain. I think he meant for me to find it. You take it reverently. It's real. The cover is cracked with age. The first few pages are filled with half-rhymes, doodles of animals in robes, and what appears to be a shopping list written entirely in puns. But as you flip further, the tone shifts. It becomes intentional, thoughtful, almost like a curriculum. Notes on timing, margins full of philosophical musings. Laughter is an exit, but also a door. And on the very last page, just one line, don't become me, become better. You close the book and look at Emile. He shrugs. I've been practicing. Over the next few days, you begin to mentor him. Not in performance, not exactly, but in listening, in rhythm, in the art of noticing how power shifts in a room when someone yawns, how a well-placed silence can be louder than a joke. He's a quick study, frighteningly so, but he doesn't imitate Triboulet. Has different. Where Triboulet cut with wit, Emile dances with it. His jokes are gentler, his timing softer, but he has the same glint in his eye, the same willingness to walk the edge between truth and laughter. You give him the unfinished mask, the one Triboulet left you. He cradles it like it's sacred. I don't know what face to paint yet, he says. You nod. That's the point, and then the whispers begin. Quiet ones at first. A limerick that appears in the king's breakfast roll. A tiny scroll tied to a goose's neck, flying across the courtyard during a meeting about taxation. A hand-drawn cartoon of the queen's astrologer juggling stars. Badly. No one knows who's behind it. Everyone pretends not to laugh, but laugh they do, because the court has felt lifeless without its edge. Now, it's breathing again. One night, returning to your chamber, you find an envelope tucked beneath your pillow. It's sealed with wax, but not a crest, a small jester's hat. You open it. Inside, a feather, bright red, and a note. Keep the flame low, but steady. He's doing well, and so are you. T. You sit in silence for a long time, the feather in your hand, the memory of laughter on your skin. Triboulet may be gone, but he hasn't vanished. He's watching, somewhere beyond the court, beyond the roles, beyond the masks, and he's smiling, because the next act has begun. And this time, the joke isn't on anyone. It belongs to everyone. You wake up before the bells, not because you want to, not even because something wakes you. It's just a feeling. A quiet prickling in your spine, the kind that says, get up. Something is shifting. The room is still cloaked in that gray, pre-dawn haze where shadows soften and corners feel farther away than usual. You sit up slowly, legs heavy, mind still half dreaming, but curiosity pulling you forward like a thread. You don't even dress fully, just throw on a cloak and slip your feet into the soft shoes by the bed. The corridor outside your door is silent, too early even for the sweepers. You know exactly where your feet are taking you before you even ask the question. The rose garden, the same one where you first found Emile doing that ridiculous poem about the goat and the bishop. You step outside. The cold air nips gently at your cheeks. The sky is still mostly dark, but there's a thin smear of light on the horizon, the kind of morning that holds its breath. And there he is, sitting cross-legged on the stone bench beneath the trellis, scribbling furiously in Triboulet's old leather notebook. His hair is a wild mess, his cloak slipping off one shoulder, and he's muttering something under his breath that might be a rhyme or might be a recipe for disaster. You clear your throat softly so you don't startle him. He glances up, eyes bright, wild in that way that only inspiration can do. Had a dream, he says. Woke up with a poem fighting me. You sit beside him, tucking your hands into your sleeves. Want to hear it? He doesn't wait for your answer. The crown is heavy, not with gold, but with the silence it pretends not to hold. You let out a low whistle. That's sharper than most knives in this castle. Emile grins. It stabbed me in the dream, too. You shake your head, half in amusement, half in disbelief at how naturally this boy channels something much older than himself. He tears out the page, folds it carefully, and slides it into a crack between the stones of the bench. What's that for? You ask. He shrugs. Triboulet said this spot eats bad ideas. Maybe it'll digest this one and burp up something better later. You nod solemnly. A noble tradition. You decide the morning lesson will be something different. Not writing, not timing, not delivery, but disappearance. What's the difference between being invisible and being ignored? You ask as you lead him through the servants' wing. He tilts his head. One's magic, the other's Tuesday. Exactly, you say. Triboulet always said that the best fools know when to step into the spotlight and when to melt into the curtains. Not every truth needs a trumpet. Some truths work best when whispered from the pantry. So you teach Emile how to blend in. Not hide blending is subtler. It's posture, breathing, the art of looking like you belong precisely where no one is looking. He walks past three ministers deep in discussion about border tariffs. Not one notices. He stands near the Queen's astrologer for 10 full minutes. Not a flicker of recognition. Didn't even blink, he says after. I think I've become a chair. Then you're halfway to Jesterhood. By late morning, he's using his new invisibility powers with gleeful abandon. A note appears on the Chancellor's chair, written in green ink. If your thoughts were any slower, we'd need to water them. No one knows who left it, but everyone laughs, even the Chancellor eventually. Later, a cartoon drawing of the king appears posted on the back of a guard's helmet. The king is depicted holding a rubber duck and wearing nothing but a tax ledger. You brace for royal wrath. But the king only mutters, "At least it's my better side," and moves on. Progress. That evening, Emile returns with a whole armful of scribbles, poems, jokes, riddles, and something that looks suspiciously like a recipe for cabbage that won't betray you. You sort through them, while he tries juggling 3 apples and a spoon. He's not very good yet. One apple hits him in the face. The spoon disappears under the couch. He collapses in laughter. You watch him. The way his joy is genuine. The way he still trips, still misses, still doubts, but doesn't stop. It reminds you of someone. You. Years ago. Or maybe Triboulet. Or maybe both. That night, you return to the old rehearsal chamber under the palace. The one with the cracked stone floor and the ring of melted candles. You haven't been back since Triboulet left. It feels quieter now. Not in a mournful way. Just settled. Emile tiptoes in behind you, whispering like he's afraid to wake the dust. He steps into the circle, looks up at the fractured masks on the wall. Were these his? He asks. You nod. Most of them. They look like they're still listening. You nod again. He picks up one of the cracked masks from the floor. It's blank. Unfinished. Should I wear this one? He asks. You consider it? No. That one's not ready yet. Like you. He smiles. Then I'll make my own. He steps into the center of the stage and begins to recite. Not from memory. Not from Triboulet's book. His own words. Rough. A little awkward. But there's rhythm. Fire. Pause. Punch. He trips over one line and covers it with a sneeze that turns into a pun. You almost clap, but you don't, because that would break the moment. And besides, he doesn't need applause. He just needs space. Afterward, you find a note slipped under your chamber door. It's folded neatly, sealed not with a crest, but with a jester's hat drawn in wax. Inside, a single red feather, and 3 words. Hez almost ready. No name, no flourish, but you know exactly who it's from. You close the note, place it beside your bed, and lie back with a sigh. Outside, the wind shifts. Somewhere, far from here, a jester watches the stars and smiles. Because the boy is becoming something more. And so are you. You notice it before he does. The palace is laughing again. Not the forced, sycophantic chuckles that usually echo through court halls, those hollow little puffs of air people use when they're trying to sound loyal. No, this laughter has rhythm. It stumbles and doubles back. It snorts. Sometimes it even hiccups. The servants share jokes while they mop. One guard hums a tune from Emile's song of the bored chamberlain, while absent-mindedly spinning his halberd like a baton. There's even a small collection of caricatures mysteriously pinned to the wall near the laundry chute one, of which features the chancellor riding a snail, looking offended. And then there's the note, scrawled in looping script, left beneath the king's morning teacup. If a nobleman sneezes in Parliament and no one blesses him, does the kingdom catch a cold? You're almost certain it's a meal. Almost. But that's the beautiful thing about mischief. When it's done well, plausible deniability is baked right into the crust. You find him later in the corridor outside the royal kitchens, hiding behind a suit of armor and sketching something on a napkin. Workshopping a bit about onions, he says without looking up. You blink. Onions. He nods. They're like monarchs, full of layers, make people cry, and somehow end up in everything. You sit down beside him. I think you're becoming dangerous, you murmur. He shrugs. Good. It means they're listening. The transformation is slow, but it's happening. Hez learning not just how to joke, but how to aim. Which truths to veil in humor. Which lies to leave exposed. How to say the thing everyone's thinking in a way that makes them laugh and think. Triboulet used to say, if you're going to shake the kingdom, better to do it with a feather duster. And Emile, for all his chaos and crooked grin, is becoming a very sharp feather. He begins performing unofficially. Small circles of staff, the gardeners, the chambermaids. Once, even the queen's cat, though, to be fair, the cat wasn't overly impressed. He practices timing by hiding behind doors and delivering punchlines to unsuspecting passers-by. You walk into a broom closet and find 3 guards in a row, blinking as he performs a one-act tragedy called Ode to a Misplaced Wig. He finishes with a bow. The guards applaud, then ask if he takes requests. In the afternoons, he reads aloud in the old rehearsal room. Not from Triboulet's notebook, he's begun filling his own. Pages of fragmented poems, overheard arguments, notes like, try banana joke again, but less about death. And, does the king know his dog is in love with the bishop's horse? You don't ask. Sometimes, the line between fiction and observation is best left blurry. Then the summons comes. Not to you, to him. A royal page, red-faced and sweating, finds you both in the garden. He looks like he's either about to deliver a message or explode. The king, he huffs, requests the boy. You blink. Which boy? The page gestures dramatically. The funny one. Emile's eyes widen. You're up, you say. He gulps. Do I need a costume? You shake your head. No bells? Just truth. And a backup joke about ducks, he mutters. The throne room is its usual mix of pomp and boredom. Nobles sit like wax figures in embroidered chairs. The king looks only mildly awake, swirling wine and pretending not to yawn. The air smells like lavender, leather, and overcooked pigeon. Then Emile walks in. No fanfare, no silly hat. Just a folded napkin in one hand, his notebook in the other. He doesn't bow. He stands, looks the king dead in the eye, and says, Your Majesty, I come bearing 3 truths. 1, your beard is magnificent. 2, the chancellor's wig was last seen in the soup. And 3, well, I'll need you to laugh before I say the 3rd. The room freezes. Then the king chuckles. Emile grins. Excellent. The 3rd truth is, court is terribly dull, and you all deserve better wigs. There's a beat. And then laughter. Big. Genuine. Even the queen smiles, hiding it behind her fan. You can see it then. The boys fear melting, replaced by something steadier. His feet plant. His shoulders lift. He begins a routine about the royal council's inability to agree on anything but cheese. He turns 5 ministers into exaggerated characters. One who only speaks in rhyming couplets, another who communicates via eyebrow gestures, and a third who has somehow confused the budget for a recipe. At one point, Emile uses 3 pears and a gravy boat to reenact a treaty negotiation. It shouldn't work. But it does. After 10 minutes, the king waves a hand. "Enough," he says, still smiling. Emile bows. "Of course, sire. I charge per chuckle." The king leans forward. "Who trained you?" Emile doesn't look at you. He just says, "A ghost, a garden, and a very patient broom closet." The king nods slowly. Then in front of the whole court, he says, "You will serve as unofficial fool in training. No pay, no title, no protections." He pauses, but also no leash. Emile's eyes widen. "Try not to burn the palace down." The king adds, then turns away. Dismissed. Outside, under the hazy dusk, you and Emile walk in silence. Eventually, he says, "Did that really happen?" You nod. He lets out a long breath. "I didn't trip," he whispers. "I didn't stammer. I didn't explode. You were brilliant, you say." "I was terrified." "Good," you reply. "Means you cared." He stops, then looks at you, really looks, and in a small, quiet voice says, "Do you think he would have been proud? You don't have to ask who he is." You just nod. "He's probably laughing somewhere," you say. "At us. At this. At the soup wig. Especially the soup wig." Emile smiles, and somewhere in the still evening air, you swear you hear the faintest echo of a bell. The palace shifts quietly around you, like a grand old ship creaking in a new tide. The winds have changed just slightly, just enough, and Emile has become the breeze everyone suddenly notices. He's not announced at court, not recognized in any formal capacity. No medallion, no title, not even a stool to stand on. And yet, the pages talk about him with a kind of gleeful anticipation, the way kitchen boys whisper about desserts before the tray even leaves the oven. You hear his jokes being retold badly by clumsy barons. You see scribbled copies of his riddles passed around like holy relics, notes folded 12 times over, tucked behind sleeves or inside goblets. One servant tries to claim she invented the line about the treasurer's wig being haunted by inflation. Emile doesn't mind. He only smiles. You know you've made it, he tells you one day, when other people start pretending they're the fool. Of course, not everyone's amused. Some of the old guard watch Emile's rise with narrowed eyes. The chancellor, in particular, has begun clearing his throat in increasingly pointed ways whenever the boy enters a room. There's a rumor that the bishop privately condemned one of Emile's pantomimes as a moral hazard, dressed in shoes too big for his station. To which Emile replied, "Well, I am a growing boy." The truth is, the court isn't used to truth that wears a smile. It's used to truth dressed in parchment, in protocol, in powdered wigs that smell like mothballs and rosewater. Emile's truth doesn't knock politely. It kicks off its boots and dances on the table, and no one can quite agree what to do with that. It doesn't help that Emile has started leaving anonymous evaluations in odd places. On the royal astrologer's charts, stars seem confused. Recommend coffee. Inside the Queen's fan, excellent use of breeze, 910. Carved lightly into a ceremonial scepter, heavy. Try lighter tyranny. You catch him slipping a poem under the king's dinner plate. It rhymes. It references both taxes and poultry. It somehow implies the Duke of Tremoille is part cabbage. You ask him later, "Aren't you worried someone will trace this back to you?" He just shrugs. I spell things wrong on purpose. The Duke thinks it's Latin. Despedor perhaps, because of his antics, Emile receives another summons. A feast. Formal, celebrating nothing in particular, which is always the most dangerous kind. Hes nervous, you can tell. He paces before the event, muttering half lines, throwing away entire routines because they lack structural integrity or make the king look too sympathetic to goose uprisings. You sit him down. Remember, you say, this isn't about being clever. It's about being precise. He blinks. Is that different? You nod. A sword cuts. A needle sews. He thinks about that, then grins. What if I'm a sword that sews? You sigh. Then wear a thimble. The feast is opulent. Swans molded from pastry. Butter sculpted into the shape of foreign mountains. A jelly that jiggles with such ominous perfection that several guests refuse to eat it. Emile sits near the end of the long table, technically among the servants, but close enough that the king can see him. The queen gives him a nod. The chancellor pointedly does not. Halfway through the meal, the king turns to Emile and raises his goblet. Well, boy, he says, voice rich with wine and curiosity, have you anything to say to amuse your king? The room quiets. Emile stands. No props, just a folded paper in hand. He bows slightly and says, I offer a tale of miscommunication, mismanagement, and a misunderstanding involving a goat, a bell, and the Duke of Burgundy's trousers. The queen snorts. The king gestures for him to proceed, and he does. The story begins simple. A jester, not himself, never himself, stumbles into the wrong council meeting and accidentally approves a new tax on feathers. The joke escalates. Suddenly, feathers are currency. Nobles fight duels over pillow contents. A goose becomes an accountant. Then, just as the room teeters on absurdity, Emile drops the line. And thus, it was discovered that chaos requires no villain only, a committee and a quill. The chancellor stirs. Someone coughs pointedly, but the king laughs. Long, loud, enough to unsettle his chair. Emile bows, folds the paper, and sits down. You exhale. After the feast, in the corridor lit with flickering torches, Emile catches up with you. You think it landed? You nod. You landed the whole ship. He looks unsure. You were walking a blade, you say, and you didn't slip. He pulls a crumpled napkin from his sleeve. I had a backup joke about fish, he mutters. Save it, for when they throw you in the moat. He smiles, but then his face grows serious. Why did the king laugh? He asks. What do you mean? I poked at the council. The bureaucracy. I made him a punchline too, just a softer one. So why? Didn't he stop me? You consider. Because you say finally, he knows that laughter buys time. While they laugh, they're not revolting. While they laugh, he's still human. You reminded them of that. Emile nods slowly. Then, that's a lot of weight for a joke. It is, you reply. And it always was. That night, Emile doesn't sleep. You find him in the old practice hall, rehearsing without sound. No audience, no applause, just movements, poses, a raised eyebrow here, a slow turn there, refining his edges. He sees you, smiles. I want to be ready, he says. For what? For the moment when the joke doesn't land, when the room turns cold, when someone powerful decides funny isn't flattering. You watch him. You can't prepare for that. I know. But you still will. He nods. Because that's what jesters do. Not just perform. Endure. The palace shifts quietly around you. like a grand old ship creaking in a new tide. The winds have changed just slightly, just enough, and Emil has become the breeze everyone suddenly notices. He's not announced at court, not recognized in any formal capacity. No medallion, no title, not even a stool to stand on. And yet, the pages talk about him with a kind of gleeful anticipation, the way kitchen boys whisper about desserts before the tray even leaves the oven. You hear his jokes being retold badly by clumsy barons. You see scribbled copies of his riddles passed around like holy relics, notes folded 12 times over, tucked behind sleeves or inside goblets. One servant tries to claim she invented the line about the treasurer's wig being haunted by inflation. Emil doesn't mind. He only smiles. You know you've made it, he tells you one day, when other people start pretending they're the fool. Of course, not everyone's amused. Some of the old guard watch Emil's rise with narrowed eyes. The Chancellor, in particular, has begun clearing his throat in increasingly pointed ways whenever the boy enters a room. There's a rumor that the bishop privately condemned one of Emil's pantomimes as a moral hazard dressed in shoes too big for his station. To which Emil replied, "Well, I am a growing boy." The truth is, the court isn't used to truth that wears a smile. It's used to truth dressed in parchment, in protocol, in powdered wigs that smell like mothballs and rosewater. Emil's truth doesn't knock politely. It kicks off its boots and dances on the table. And no one can quite agree what to do with that. It doesn't help that Emil has started leaving anonymous evaluations in odd places. On the royal astrologers' charts, stars seem confused. Recommend coffee. Inside the Queen's fan, excellent use of breeze. 9-10. Carved lightly into a ceremonial scepter. Heavy. Try lighter tyranny. You catch him slipping a poem under the king's dinner plate. It rhymes. It references both taxes and poultry. It somehow implies the Duke of Tremoille is part cabbage. You ask him later, "Arant, you worried someone will trace this back to you?" He just shrugs. "I spell things wrong on purpose. The Duke thinks it's Latin." Despite, or perhaps because of his antics, Emil receives another summons. A feast. Formal. Celebrating nothing in particular, which is always the most dangerous kind. Hez nervous, you can tell. He paces before the event, muttering half lines, throwing away entire routines because they lack structural integrity or make the king look too sympathetic to goose uprisings. You sit him down. "Remember," you say, "this isn't about being clever. It's about being precise." He blinks. "Is that different?" You nod. A sword cuts. A needle sews. He thinks about that, then grins. What if a sword that sews? You sigh. Then wear a thimble. The feast is opulent. Swans molded from pastry. Butter sculpted into the shape of foreign mountains. A jelly that jiggles with such ominous perfection that several guests refuse to eat it. Emil sits near the end of the long table, technically among the servants, but close enough that the king can see him. The queen gives him a nod. The chancellor pointedly does not. Halfway through the meal, the king turns to Emil and raises his goblet. "Well, boy," he says, voice rich with wine and curiosity. "Have you anything to say to amuse your king?" The room quiets. Emil stands. No props. Just a folded paper in hand. He bows slightly and says, "I offer a tale of miscommunication, mismanagement, and a misunderstanding involving a goat, a bell, and the Duke of Burgundy's trousers." The queen snorts. The king gestures for him to proceed, and he does. The story begins simple. A jester, not himself, never himself, stumbles into the wrong council meeting and accidentally approves a new tax on feathers. The joke escalates. Suddenly, feathers are currency. Nobles fight duels over pillow contents. A goose becomes an accountant. Then, just as the room teeters on absurdity, Emile drops the line. And thus it was discovered that chaos requires no villainly a committee and a quill. The chancellor stirs. Someone coughs pointedly, but the king laughs, long, loud, enough to unsettle his chair. Emile bows, folds the paper, and sits down. You exhale. After the feast, in the corridor lit with flickering torches, Emile catches up with you. You think it landed? You nod. You landed the whole ship. He looks unsure. You were walking a blade, you say, and you didn't slip. He pulls a crumpled napkin from his sleeve. I had a backup joke about fish, he mutters. Save it, for when they throw you in the moat. He smiles. But then his face grows serious. Why did the king laugh? He asks. What do you mean? I poked at the council. The bureaucracy. I made him a punchline too, just a softer one. So why didn't he stop me? You consider. Because, you say finally, he knows that laughter buys time. While they laugh, they're not revolting. While they laugh, he's still human. You reminded them of that. Emile nods slowly. Then, that's a lot of weight for a joke. It is, you reply. And it always was. That night, Emile doesn't sleep. You find him in the old practice hall, rehearsing without sound. No audience, no applause, just movements, poses. A raised eyebrow here, a slow turn there, refining his edges. He sees you, smiles. I want to be ready, he says. For what? For the moment when the joke doesn't land, when the room turns cold, when someone powerful decides funny isn't flattering. You watch him. You can't prepare for that. I know, but you still will. He nods, because that's what jesters do. Not just perform, endure. You wake to the sound of quiet footsteps in the hall. Not the clipped march of guards or the lazy shuffle of sleepy servants, but the rhythmic, unpredictable pattern of someone pacing with purpose and doubt all at once. You already know who it is. When you open the door, there he is. Emile, dressed in yesterday's tunic, hair sticking out at angles like he fought a pillow and lost. He's muttering something under his breath and bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, like a street performer working up the nerve to approach a new crowd. If I open with the goose joke, does it make the war joke too heavy? You squint. What goose joke? He looks up. Oh, right. Good morning. You sigh and wave him inside. Over stale bread and lukewarm tea leftovers from the kitchens that neither of you have the energy to reheathe finally spills it. The king has summoned him for a private audience. Not just any audience, a gathering of foreign dignitaries, here to finalize what everyone hopes is a treaty, but what the more cynical call a polite staring contest with wine and embroidery. The king wants Emile to perform, not entertain, not delight, soften. It's a subtle difference, but an important one. Emile, still new to this world of veiled threats and power in silk robes, doesn't quite grasp the weight. He wants a joke, Emile says. You shake your head. He wants a message. He leans back in the chair, balancing on two legs in that way that terrifies both furniture and tutors. So, what am I supposed to say to 5 men who barely speak the same language and haven't smiled since their baptism? You smile. That's what you're going to figure out. The chamber chosen for the event is smaller than the grand hall, but more intimidating in its intimacy. The walls are lined with tapestries depicting past treaties, scenes of monarchs shaking hands, while armies hover just off canvas, as if someone might call them in at any moment. 7 men are present, all dressed in various shades of too expensive. Their rings could blind. Their mustaches could cut glass. They sit stiffly, like mannequins made of velvet and suspicion. The queen is there too, watching silently behind a gauzy veil. She rarely speaks at these things, but her gaze can crush a foolish sentence before it's fully formed. You remain just outside the curtain, close enough to hear, but hidden. That's your role now, stagehand to the Jester, guardian of the line between courage and catastrophe. Emil steps forward with only a folded cloth in his hand. No props, no preamble, no bells. He bows low and says, "Your Excellencies, I come offering peace delivered via poultry." You wince. They blink. He smiles. "My name is Emil. I've been asked to help ease the tension in this room, possibly by making you laugh, or at the very least, confuse you enough to forget why you were angry." A snort. From someone. He continues, "I shall tell the tale of a goose. Not an ordinary goose, this one had ambitions. She wanted to lead negotiations. Now they're interested. The tale unfolds. A kingdom at war, both sides weary and confused. Enter a goose. No one can agree what she's doing there. Some say she's an omen. Some say a gift. Some suspect she's a spy. She honks during speeches, nibbles the treaty drafts, and refuses to leave. Eventually, the commanders give up and let her sit at the table. Miraculously, peace is achieved. Not because of the goose, Emil clarifies, but because arguing in front of a honking bird is deeply undignified. A laugh. Small, tight, but unmistakable. He follows it with a jab at court translators. All wars are misunderstandings, and all misunderstandings are caused by men named Claude, mispronouncing everything. Then he goes quiet, lets the silence settle, and ends with, "So perhaps, next time we argue over borders, we bring a goose, and maybe leave Claude at home." A pause, then applause. Soft, polite, but real. Even the queen nods. Afterward, the king calls him over. No throne here, just a carved chair by the fire. "You did well," the king murmurs. Emil shrugs. "I don't think they understood half of it. They understood enough." The king leans forward. "You are not just a fool now, boy. You are a mirror." They laugh. Yes, but they also see. Be careful what you show them. Emil swallows. You see it on his face. He finally feels the weight. Later, in the west corridor, where the wind always whistles through the stained glass, and the guards pretend not to eavesdrop, you find him sitting on a bench, rubbing his temples. Did I cross a line? You sit beside him. No. Did I draw one? You nod. He sighs. I don't want to be dangerous. You look at him. You are, in the best way. He's quiet. Then says, They called me a weapon? You nod again. And a mirror? Yes. And you? You smile. I still see a boy with too many goose jokes and not enough sleep. He laughs. Tired. Relieved. That night, before turning in, he leaves something at your door, wrapped in a strip of velvet, tied with twine. Inside, a half-finished mask. One side painted gold, the other side bare. A small note folded neatly beneath it. For the days when I forget who's laughing. You sit with it. Feel the weight of it. Not just the object, but the fear, the insight, the growing understanding that this role is no longer about jest or applause or clever rhymes. It's about telling the truth beautifully enough that no one realizes until later that it hurt. You trace your fingers over the bare side of the mask, and quietly, for the first time in years, you hope no one ever has to wear it. You wake before the bells this time, before the sun has had the courage to peer fully through the eastern windows. The palace is still, hushed in that way only great stone buildings can belike its trying not to remember too much before breakfast. You dress slowly, almost absent-mindedly, letting your fingers fumble with buttons that seem to have grown smaller overnight. As you step out into the corridor, you hear it again. Not voices, not music, but the absence of both. The silence has teeth now. It gnaws at the corners of rooms and chews through the wallpaper. You find Emile by the servants' staircase, sitting on the bottom step with a cloak draped over his knees and a cold teacup cupped between both hands. He doesn't look up as you approach. "He's dying," he says softly. You don't ask who. The king has grown quieter each day. The lines around his mouth have deepened like dried riverbeds, and even his laughter, once so quick, so eager, has turned brittle, like something left too long in the sun. They don't say it outright, of course. They never do. Instead, the court begins to shift its weight. Nobles speaking in more measured tones, guards straightening a little more quickly, the queen sitting through meetings with her fan unopened, as if mourning has already started but cannot be named. Emile has stopped performing. Not by royal decree, but by instinct. The jokes he once told, the sharp ones, the foolish ones, even the goose monologue seem suddenly too loud for these halls. His bells are silent. His mask has been left, intentionally, on the table beside his bed. One afternoon, he walks into your chamber, holding a folded piece of parchment. He says nothing, just hands it to you and waits. You open it. It's a request. From the king. Just one word. Tonight, the court assembles quietly. No fanfare, no trumpets. Just velvet slippers and the rustle of old robes and younger fears. The great dining hall has been transformed not into a theater, but something gentler. Fewer chairs. A single brazier glowing orange in the center. Candles, not chandeliers. Emile enters without paint, without costume, just himself. You watch from the shadows, your usual perch, though this time it feels less like a performance and more like a vigil. He steps into the firelight and begins. "I was once told," he says, "that laughter is the last luxury of the powerful." He paces slowly, thoughtfully. "But I've also seen beggars laugh. I've seen stable boys giggle over nothing. I've seen the queen herself snort when I tripped on her lapdog. That draws a ripple barely, there, but present." He continues. "So maybe laughter isn't a luxury. Maybe it's a necessity. Like sleep, like breath, like forgiveness." He tells a story, then one you've never heard before, of a young juggler in a dying village who performed for free, night after night, even when no one showed up, even when the food ran out, even when his own hands ached, because he believed somehow that laughter could hold things together a little longer. He wasn't a hero, Emile says. He wasn't even very good. Another ripple. But the people remembered him, because in the worst of it, he dared to ask them to feel something that wasn't despair. The king listens, eyes closed, but not asleep, hands folded in his lap, breathing slow. Emile steps closer. "I have mocked this court. I have sung about ducks negotiating treaties, and squirrels hoarding pine cones, and bishops who drink too much wine. And somehow, you kept inviting me back. A smile here. There. Maybe because you recognize that beneath the feathers and rhymes, I was trying to give you something you'd forgotten how to ask for. He kneels. Permission to be human. The hall is utterly still now. No coughs, no shifting chairs. Emil looks up at the king. And so tonight, I do not come to make you laugh. A pause. I come to say thank you. Another pause. For letting me in. For letting me stay. For letting me fail. And trip. And return the next night with a song about your dog's hat. A soft chuckle from somewhere in the back. He stands. And for reminding me that the sharpest joke, when aimed with kindness, becomes a kind of healing. He bows. Low. And leaves. Later, in the corridor, he speaks without looking at you. I think that was my last performance. You don't respond right away. Then, you've said that before. He nods. This time, I hope I mean it. You walk together, not quickly, not slowly. Just enough to match the rhythm of a palace holding its breath. 2 days later, the bells toll. The king is gone. Not suddenly, not violently, just gone. Like breath leaving a room, like music fading from a string once plucked. The court moves as it always does, servants draping black, messengers flying like startled birds, priests whispering rites like apologies. You don't see Emil until the next evening. He's in the chapel garden, seated beneath the linden tree again. The same spot he always returns to when the world feels too sharp. Hez holding the mask, the one you thought he'd forgotten. Still half gold, half bare, still waiting. I keep thinking, he says, about that line he told me once. That laughter is a mirror. You sit beside him. And I think I finally understand it. He turns the mask over in his hands. I've been showing them who they are. But now, maybe it's time to help them become who they want to be. You nod. Because you know. The fool is gone. But something else remains. Not louder, not brighter, just truer. A voice that learned, through bells and bruises and too many goose jokes, how to walk beside power without bowing to it, how to speak softly without disappearing, how to hold up a mirror that doesn't mock but invites. And as you sit in the quiet with him, beneath the first stars of a newly uncertain reign, you realize the story isn't ending. It's simply changing tone, like a song played slower, softer, but still remembered, still needed, and still very much alive.